So I'm with Tony Rodrigues at the conference in France that is being held in Valence, and I'm with him to discuss his new book concerning remote viewing. And Tony's also going to discuss the unique circumstances where he learned about remote viewing as part of a secret space program, and how that training is being used today, and also about the experiences and the kind of methods and protocols that were used to train him while only 10 years old in remote viewing. Well, welcome Tony to Exopolitics Today.
Hi Dr. Sala. Thanks for having me back. It's great to see you. It's been a wonderful trip here.
Well, this has been quite a conference, and for those that maybe aren't familiar with your story, maybe you should give just let's start at the beginning. What happened that led to you being abducted by Greys? For those that don't know, just in the thumb.
I had gone to school with a child who said his father was an Illuminati and had access, apparently, to programs. And so this was 1982. I was 10 years old, 4th grade, and I was abducted after meeting him and his father in school. The best I can tell, it's April 15th, 1982 was the night I was abducted, and I did what you and many of your audience knows as a 20 and back. I did 20 years in several programs from one to the next, and then I was put back the next morning, the following morning, April 16th, 1982. However, completely changed, completely different person, and with some harmful effects, I guess, psychological effects from it. So with some baggage. I came back with some baggage.
Okay, well, so you did something that led to this person who was very senior in covert projects, classified programs, who was an Illuminati, and he used his influence to get you abducted that night. So right away, there's a connection between this senior level official in some government-run project or in the secret societies and the beings that did the abduction. So who did the abduction? Just explain that connection.
So in the middle of the night, my house was buzzed by a craft. There were bright lights outside, and there was one gray and several smaller reptilians that came into my bedroom in the middle of the night. I believe they took my father as well. I heard my mother interacting with them at the same time across the hallway. And they picked me up and carried me from my bed to the end of the bed, and there was a flash of light, and I woke up in a laboratory. I have no idea if it was on a ship or a base. I really have no idea where it was. But I woke up in a laboratory and went through a few medical procedures, and then they laid me down on the table and did another procedure on me. Gave me like a needle to the eye, and I woke up at the first stop of what was going to be many jobs that I did during the 20 years, including being traded off into space, into the infrastructure in the solar system, the secret space program.
Okay, so I just wanted to kind of like make it clear here that there is a very clear connection between this official or this high-level official within the classified projects and this group of extraterrestrials. Clearly there's some sort of agreement, arrangement, where they were responding to his request to have you abducted and to put you through this procedure.
That's right, and that brings up a good point that since I've gone public with my story some years ago, I've interacted with a lot of people that feel they've been through the same exact thing. And there's a very real connection between people that are living amongst us and ETs. So there's an entire society of people among us that are fully aware, consciously aware of, and have access to these technologies and the extraterrestrials. They have full knowledge of it, and there are people that could be that we rub shoulders with every day.
Right. And those lines of communication and contact between these, whether we're talking Illuminati or kind of classified programs and these extraterrestrials that are performing the abduction, seems to be pretty seamless. It's like, because this all happened in the one day, really. I mean, or within a short period of time. It was
a Wednesday where I set up. His father came in to judge the science fair, And that was on a Wednesday. I set up my science exhibit and walked by him, and he said, "Dad, that's that boy I told you about." And it was Thursday night. I remember it vividly because when I came back, I was so disoriented. I had to get up and go to school for one last day, Friday. And when I look back, it was very cold that week. And the following day, the Saturday, there's a picture in the end of my book where I was taken that Saturday, where I'm playing in the mud puddles in my driveway. And I was able to go back and look at the weather reports, and it was exactly the way I remembered it. It was exactly how it was. So that was Wednesday was the science fair. Thursday was the abduction. I woke up and went to school Friday, that following Friday, and then the rains came and it warmed up. A warm front came through on Friday night. And Saturday I went out and played because I was extremely disoriented afterwards.
Mm-hmm. So this is 1982. You're only 10 years old at the time, and you're forcibly recruited into or taken into these programs without any kind of consent by you or your parents.
That's right.
Okay, so now there was a very interesting kind of step in all of this where you said at some point one of the grey extraterrestrials said that they were going to borrow your consciousness for 20 years. So can you explain that?
So they had to acquire, so in the laboratory setting, I was on a table, and there was a smaller reptilian there, and it's my understanding he was security. And he was the chaperone for me. He was the muscle, basically. And the grey told him that he had to explain to me and get permission, or some form of consent. And he told me that they wanted to borrow my consciousness, verbatim. I remember it very clearly. "We want to borrow your consciousness for 20 years. And I said no, of course. And he said, no, this is a blessing to you. You're going to live longer than you would have. This is the most valuable thing you could get, is more time to be alive. And you're going to come back. We have time travel. We're going to put you back home tomorrow morning." He explained it because I said I can't be gone from my mom and my brothers and sisters for 20 years. My sister will grow up. I won't know her. And I was scared at that point. And he said, no, we have time travel. You're going to be put back. They won't even know you're gone, but you'll have lived a rich life. He didn't use that word rich, but you'll have lived longer. And that time was the most valuable thing that you could give anybody.
So your consciousness was being borrowed and being transferred into a clone. So you want to explain that process where you have your natural body, physical body, back in 1982 in some location, and then your consciousness being transferred into a clone. Where was that clone?
So I deduced that. So, I'm not 100% that that's exactly what happened, but that makes the most sense. When I really look back and play it again in my mind, it makes sense because I woke up, then they did a procedure on me, and I woke up in Inyokern, California, in the buildings that I have cited in my next book. I woke up with no memory of who I was. I could barely speak English. Right after that procedure, I woke up sick, with a nurse, a woman over me, and then a doctor that was there. They examined me, and that was in Inyokern, California. I had no memory, and the reason I think it was a clone, because it would make sense that body had no memories in it. At the end of the 20 years when they put me back, I woke up and I had my memories back after a procedure. I woke up and then I had my memories of mom and dad and Michigan where I grew up, but I didn't have the 20 years of memories. So it makes sense that it was a separate body that accumulated those 20 years of memory in the space program. And then at the end, they took me out of that and put me in my original body where my original memories of life were waiting for me. So that, to me, that just makes sense. And I'm just trying to, by process of elimination of how many things could have happened to me that made that happen. And it just makes sense. And then I was referred to several times as a clone during the 20 years. So the doctor in Inyokern asked me if I had any memories. Why don't you think that is? It's because you're a clone. And, here you are kind of thing. So whether or not that was technically the case or what I wouldn't know, because I was experiencing the procedures without being briefed on them or anything. They just would wheel me into a surgery and it would happen. So
it's very interesting because that's something that many people have spoken about, the technology to transfer consciousness from one physical body into another. Now, what exactly is being transferred? Is it your consciousness or is it your soul?
So again, I don't know for sure, but I would say awareness, my awareness. And when I look back on it, so as I sit here with you, I'm 52 years old. It was when I was 10 years old. It was 42 years ago. When I think back to being 10 years old, it's a linear memory of 42 years. And then I remember the 20 years, the 20 and back. To think back to 9 years old to me is a great distance. So it was like I experienced the 10 years, then the 20 years, and then my life. Like I remember it in a linear fashion. So my awareness is the best. That's the best. I think a lot of people don't really know the difference between consciousness and soul. We really don't. We're limited with our knowledge of it. I'm sure there are gurus that can tell you exactly what it's like, that are on a mountain in Tibet. But I think for the most part, because of how powerful the knowledge of what you are is, it's purposely hidden from us. So was it my soul? Was it my consciousness? I'm of the mind, I'm one of those people, I don't believe in a soul trap. I don't believe that the moon is going to harvest my soul. I don't think that when I die that there's going to be any kind of technology that's going to stop me from moving on to where I'm supposed to be. So that's my inner feeling, that's my gut feeling, it's my opinion.
Now, Randy Kramer, I interviewed him back in 2014, and he said something to me that was very interesting. He said that they could extract portions of one's soul to animate a clone of that person, and he said that they could do that up to 10,000 times. That they could extract portions of one's soul up to 10,000 times to animate 10,000 clones, and after that it just wouldn't work. But each of those clones would have a spark of that original soul matrix.
So I've certainly spoken to other people that feel that they've been taken in that fashion, or many chunks of them, many alters have branched off, and it's terrifying to think about. That's a terrifying thought. What I've found with a lot of people I've worked with, so there are some telltale signs. There are common denominators when I deal with people, because thousands of people have reached out to me since I've been public. So common denominators resurface, and one of them is the lack of willpower or awareness during the 20 years, and it was certainly my case. So I was a straight A student. I was an outstanding student, top 5% of my school, on April 14th, 1982. And on April 16th, 1982, I was a poor student. And it lasted for 20 years. And at the end of it, my life was not great, mediocre. I was found ways to be happy, but I certainly did not, and I was reminded by my mom, I did not live up to my potential through those years. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the 20 years, when essentially, if we're talking it was a clone, when the clone ceased to exist, it was as if I got it back. The portion of my consciousness that had been taken, or soul, if you will, it was like I got it back at the end of the 20 years, and I developed much better habits. Like it was like, I became more aware of myself. I just kind of got my act together.
Very interesting. Now, one other person I've interviewed, Mark Demizio, says that he was used in one of these programs. He washed out after a year or something, but he says that they took two extractions of his soul to animate two clones, and that he said that those two clones did things over the next 20 years that he would never have done, but they did. And he said that when those clones died, that he got back those memories of those. What do you make of that?
That would certainly support what it felt like for me. So that it was afterwards. I had bleed-through memories as they were happening. So the highs and lows, some of the big moments in my regular life when I was a teen and in my 20s, I would get bleed-through memories. I would experience what the other me was experiencing in dreams right before waking up at dawn. And I had bleed-through memories that didn't make any sense whatsoever. But I didn't get my memory recall until I was 40, I believe, 2015. Mm-hmm. So I didn't get my memory call for quite some time afterwards. So that would support that. I wouldn't argue to what Mark said.
Okay. Now, so 1982, your consciousness is transferred into a clone, and you find yourself at Inyokern. You wake up, there are doctors around you. So yeah, tell us about Inyokern. What happened there?
So since I went public, most people want to hear about Mars. Most interviews I do, they want to hear about Mars or spaceships or what are the ETs. Tell me what the ETs look like. And so as a result, I've skipped over those years and never really researched them until recently. And last year, I had gone to, and I'd been on the phone with you in 2016 when I went to one of the places I remember on Earth, in Seattle. And it was a shame that I didn't take somebody along to film it, because it was very validating evidence that I knew my way around a foreign place that I can prove I've never been. And I knew the roads, I knew where the things were in the stores, I knew things. So this time I took the opportunity before last year's Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection in Orlando. I wanted to get footage, and Tyler Koala from Journey to Truth podcast went with me and filmed it. And we went and stayed in Ridgecrest, California, down the street from the Inyokern Airport, which was originally a naval ordnance testing facility where they were developing weapons for the Navy. And I remembered it intimately. And Brad Olson had visited there and called me. We did a live call, and there was some validation there with what Brad dug. It was very awesome that he did that. But I went back and I didn't expect to find a ton of evidence, but I did. And I found the buildings that we were in. I found the chassis of one of the buildings that's probably burnt, that I was in that program. And it really inspired me to go back and start digging up information. And it was a remnant, it was sandwiched in between Project Grill Flame and Project Center Lane. And there's a great deal of information around these projects where they were developing remote viewing techniques. And it seems like in between there, they knew when remote viewing had become successful with Project Grill Flame and the the psychoenergetics of remote influencing, that the other military branches wanted access, but only the Army INSCOM, the Army essentially had access. I'll let them go by. Only the Army had access to the data from the research with Stanford Research Institute and Army INSCOM. So that was the funding. You can find the paper trail. And so they were going to reclassify it. They were going to close that program, and then Project Center Lane gave the data to all the branches of government and even some corporations, Boeing and McDonnell Douglas. Boeing was training remote viewers in '83, and there's paperwork that supports that. So in between that time, when they knew that it went before the Joint Arms Committee, the Senate Joint Arms Committee, Senator Claiborne Pell put it between them, and they reclassified the Grill Flame to where they had to have permission, volunteer-only basis. So for those 9 months in between the funding of Grill Flame and the beginning of Center Lane, they wanted to see what they could do, the maximum capacity of the technology. So they used kids as clones. There's other documents I've found that showed the Chinese were experimenting on children for remote viewing as well.
Can you just back up there? So what you found documentation concerning Grill Flame using cloned children?
No, I wish. I've looked very hard. So I'm cross-referencing this with what I remember. So I was taken April 15th. The funding for Grill Flame was canceled April 7th. And so that, I remember being there, and I remember the doctor explaining it to us, that the funding was carried over, that the Grill Flame, they didn't have funds from Grill Flame, that they used contractors and access to the secret space program or classified programs that gave clones, is what he was aware of. And that's what he explained it to us kids right before he began the program. So he was very matter of fact about it. It was for science, to see what was see if there would be any discoveries of using methods on children. And so when I look back on the record, the paper trail of the funding and how it all worked out, it all lines up. So it's the exact same window of time that I remember, because I know that I was taken April 15th, but I was delivered to Peru on January 1st, or the first week of January, because they had just finished celebrating New Year's when I got there.
So we're talking 8 months later?
Yes. Yeah, so it was about an 8-month program.
So 8 months you were in Inyokern.
And I did a month in Seattle, and then was shipped off to Peru. So
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so then in terms of the sequencing, so this program that you were transferred into was after the official funding for Grill Flame had ended, or Grill Flame ended to be part of an army program, and it was now transferred over to this program, whoever was running it. Now, the thing is, Inyokern is, well, you can say it's part of the China Lake facility or right next to the China Lake facility, which is the Navy's premier research facility.
Yes.
So, the obvious question is, was the US Navy involved in what was happening there, or was this some kind of side project on Navy territory?
So I believe it was a contractor that had access to the that level of security clearance, which I think is, I forget what they call the clearance, level 4, level 5. It was a contractor, and I found evidence of 7 or 8 contractors, and that's in the CIA, the INSA, the FBI Special Services, INSCOM, Army INSCOM, and a couple others. I don't have them completely memorized, but I have a document of proof of contractors involved in Grow Flame as well.
Okay, so how many children were involved in the program? What you were exposed to?
In my mind, I remember about a dozen. I think it may be 12 to 14 kids that were involved.
Okay. And what were the general conditions like where they were held?
So that's the other thing, is I found the area where I remember the buildings were placed is currently classified as special district. Just those 3 buildings. So there's a tax assessment for all the structures in the United States. There's a website that has that, and those 3 buildings that are there don't exist in that. They have no tax assessment. They're classified as a special district, and local law enforcement and military law enforcement do not have jurisdiction in them. So if you were going to conduct an experiment on cloned children for human rights problems, it was legal. There was legality. So for one, I guess, what was your question again? What were the conditions like?
Yeah.
They were portables. There was a portable that we had cots, military, like old Korean War era looking military cots that we slept in. We had clothes. It wasn't ritzy, and we would get up in our socks and walk over to the other portable, which was in disrepair, and there were like swing sets, seats hanging from the ceiling. So there was a feeling of not being grounded, and they would drug us and we would watch movies over and over again, like disturbing movies with subliminal programming in them, and that was the bulk of the, at least 3 months of that before they began with sleep deprivation and a few other techniques. And then at the end of that, they went into remote viewing experiments and out-of-body experiments, and they were trying different technologies with us. And it's obvious now, so at the time I didn't care what they were doing. So, you can imagine if you're being forced, as a child, you have really little interest in what they were trying to achieve there. I was just worrying about what was going to happen to me the following day. But looking back on it now, and with the research I've done since I've been there and recovered, I found the place. I went back to Inyokern with Tyler, and it was the smell, the heat, the sunlight, everything was exactly how I remember. And I began to remember more details, especially now as an adult. But they were working on countermeasures. And I found documents that prove that as well, that was actually the justification for the funding, was that they knew that Russia and China had these programs, and they were trying to develop countermeasures because it's famous episode of Stanford Research Institute finding a NSA facility, and which was brand new, and it broke their security. So there's a story about that. But they were working on countermeasures, and to some extent they were successful.
Okay, so it sounds like whoever devised this program was just taking advantage of an opportunity to use children who were clones, and there were no real laws that were applicable to them, no jurisdiction, so they exposed them to these kind of strange conditions, abusive conditions. And you mentioned the TV, looking at the TV, seeing all this kind of, all these gruesome images, that you could call that a kind of like soft mind control, if you like.
Programming.
Programming, okay. What about trauma-based, MK Ultra type mind control?
It was exactly that. That's exactly what they were doing. So they would take us in. So every day, to get into the gory details of it, it began with us just being drugged. It began with us just watching a film, and it was a reel-to-reel projector on a screen, and it would play and then rewind and then play again. And these were movies that had obvious subliminal words flashing quickly. They had Disney cartoons. They had news clippings from There was the kidnapping at the Olympics. There was an airplane. They kept showing the clippings of, people being murdered, and then they would show animals being butchered, and then it would go back to Disney, and it would repeat. It was because you would experience the gambit of emotions. The Disney ones were soothing, and as a kid you're watching a cartoon, and then all of a sudden something traumatic, gore, and so it was very emotionally draining. And then after a few days, they were hallucinogens. They were giving drugs that would keep us up. And then after a week of that, we were being taken out, woken up in the middle of the night, putting in ice water, or they would wake us up and come and slap us or shock us and let us go back to sleep. They broke some of our arms. They dislocated my arm, and then you'd have to watch the movie in pain. And then he would debrief at the end of each day. There was a cubicle. He'd bring us, 2 kids would wait. We'd all go back and lay in our cot after it was over. We'd lay in our cot, and then he'd call us, and you wait here, so you'd wake up. And he would debrief us, and he'd ask us how we felt throughout what did you feel today? And the thing I remember is after sleep deprivation, it was impossible to debrief us almost, because I was just incoherent after going a few days of not being able to sleep for more than 15 minutes at a time.
Okay. And so presumably all of this was designed to prepare you for some remote viewing protocols that they wanted to expose you or indoctrinate you in. So, tell us about those. So
it seemed like the end result of that was that we were completely the end result, it seemed to be, looking back on it, was that we would do what we were told. It was that simple. They could shock us an electric shock, and I would go into a catatonic state, and I would do exactly what I was told. So they could come and give us a shock, and he could say, now you're a remote viewer, and you'll see clearly. Tell us what you see. Here's the target. And there was a mixture, a small mixture of the CRV protocol, but there were other methods that we were using, and very simple things, pad and paper kind of thing.
So did they just give you like the standard alphanumerics, and like what do you see or what happens when you consider these?
There were several techniques that he did.
Vous m'entendez?
Oh oui.
It started out with just a pad and paper and just the coordinate. Now write what you see. What do you see there? And it always began, and I'll let this out sound like some secret, but the meditation, it began with a meditation with the blank mind. He encouraged us to not think of anything. And in fact, we practiced it quite a bit, where you thought of absolutely nothing. No words, no sounds, nothing, no mantras or anything like that, just a absolute blank mind. And then you'd look at the coordinate numbers or letters and draw what you saw, or describe what you were seeing, what you were inspired by to see.
And was it a reward punishment system? If you were on target?
Those kids, there were kids that were better at it than others in the class, and there were other psychoenergetic. So there were other experiments he was doing, and some kids were better. There were a couple rock stars in the class that were very accurate. Okay. And so you did.
Explain psychoenergetics too.
Psychoenergetics are actually interacting with the target. So not viewing the target specifically, but interacting with the target space, changing the perception of time, changing the perception of movement, changing temperature at the target, moving things, hitting a light switch possibly, psychoenergetics. So, and then it went into other things outside of meditation. There were drugs involved. There were binaurals involved. There's great evidence that the techniques and the technology from the Monroe Institute they were using, the Project Grill Flame had access to that stuff in 1977. I've uncovered all the documents in my book. And so we were using binaurals. They were using drugs. They were using laser waves into the eyes. And then he would take us physically to targets. So we drove out into the desert where he had flags on hills, and he took us to that, and he would hide stones, and we would go there and interact. And it turns out, when I look back on it, I didn't do so well at that experiment, but what I realized was that the reason being is they were testing countermeasures. So they had the kids that were better at it in the class defending the target, and then the rest of the class searching the target. And so the data was incomplete. The countermeasures worked.
I see. So in 1982, there was already that understanding that remote viewing of targets, that there could be countermeasures where you have defensive remote viewers who are protecting the target.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and like I said, that was when they briefed it. So I have the letters to Congress for funding. So the letters that the Army had applied for funding in the name of Stanford Research Institute, and they were talking. It was for countermeasures developments. So that was really what they were after. And in the process, they developed the methods of remote viewing that they found to be useful in many other applications, military applications, combat applications, and that all went to Center Lane, Project Center Lane in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
Interesting. So, I mean, there's a very interesting project that the crypto viewing team, Dick Allguy, did on Maria Orsic, where they remote viewed her, and they what they described was they saw a very pretty, very highly gifted, spiritual, highly evolved being captured by Russians in Berlin, and her being abused and then being executed on the spot. Now, Elena Danaan received communications from Thorhan Aredian saying that Maria Orsic was actually liberated from Germany before it surrendered to to Russia, and that what the Galactic Federation of Worlds did was that they created cover images or took countermeasures to throw off people trying to find out what really happened to Maria Orsic. So what do you think about that?
Well, firstly, I don't want to take anything away from Dick Allguy and the Future Forecasting Group. I'm very impressed with their work. I met Dick on one occasion, and I saw that session. It was very impressive. He had no idea who the target was, and he did that. My own work, and I've included it in the countermeasures chapter in my group. So I have currently two groups. It'll soon be 3 groups that I teach the remote viewing. And we did experiments and countermeasures because there's a lot of, not only with that instance with Maria Orsic, but around the Galactic Federation Starship that's in orbit, there are remote viewers. And there's a lot of people saying that you can't stop remote viewing. And we've been able to. So it was a dozen remote viewers on one occasion, 15 remote viewers on 14 remote viewers on another one. I kept track of all the data. We had a basis of average score an average expectation that they hit every week for months, for 6 months. Every single week they had the same score. And then we broke a team into countermeasures to project a false target. And it worked. So the score plummeted to a lowest score we ever had. And then we did it again. We did it once with the target coordinates and once without. And without the target coordinates, we were still able to greatly skew the data, to greatly change the perception of what the target really was. So it's absolutely possible. We did it very easily.
So how were the drugs used to enhance remote viewing abilities?
So I've uncovered some documents about bulbacapnine. It's like the Yansuo plant in China. There's an American version of the same plant that they use those in some of the things, and it's a dopamine inhibitor. And I actually bought some, and it's not a drug. It's an herb. It's an herbal supplement. It's used for painkiller. And I think I took it for 5 days, and I started to just feel awful, god awful. So I quit doing that. I was going to experiment with it. So there's a lot of things, and I believe that some of the more effective compounds that they were using remain classified. So when you specifically look for them, but bulbacapnine is one that kind of slipped through the cracks that they're using on these in these programs. So there were drugs, there were minerals that they were giving us, there were supplements that we had to take. The doctor explained during the program in Inyokern that they were very expensive, and to take the whole thing. The kids, some kids didn't want to take everything, but we were definitely in the early stages being given hallucinogens, and then towards the end of it, that faded away, and we were allowed to sleep. And I remember even into the first week, they let us catch up to sleep, and then began running experiments, but we were still too tired to do it, especially the binaurals. We all just fell asleep when we had the binaurals on us. So they changed it into the mornings. They changed our diet. They literally were in control of all of our intake. And there's a few other variables that are not palatable to speak about.
Were Faraday cages or any other kind of technologies used to enhance psychic abilities?
So I believe that was the main reason why they used the Inyokern facility in the middle of the airport, because it was far away from electromagnetic fields. So but now what stands on the site where those portables are just storage sheds. And so we were far away from, the airport wasn't being used much, and we were far away from where electromagnet, so they didn't have to put Faraday cages around us. We were just in a very low electromagnetic area. But that was one of the concerns. That was absolutely a concern. And when they started using the headsets, that they actually wired, there were things like they had an electrical engineer there and they monitored the EM field that we were exposed to when we were listening to the headphones.
Mm-hmm. So you already mentioned that the instructors in that remote viewing program believed you were clones. So how did they treat you? How did they treat you differently to, say, normal kids? I mean, how did they justify what they did to you in terms of, well, this is a clone, so I can do to this 10-year-old clone anything I want, whereas to a normal 10-year-old, I was like, no, hands off, you can't do anything. How did they justify doing that?
Well, to them, they had no fear of a reprieve of a parent, like giving us back to our parents. There was no, culpability, for one. For two, the doctor started out, like, I gotta say, it sounds really bad, and there were some bad things he did, but he was a man dedicated to the science of what was going on. And I don't want to sound like I've been accused of Stockholm Syndrome before. And I don't want to sound like that. But the reality is that he was doing everything he could to progress the science of what they had discovered in remote viewing and psychoenergetics. And it was easy to tell, even as a 10-year-old boy, that he had lost his stomach for it over time. By the end of the project, he had really shared our trauma. In the beginning, it was something that was all in the name of science, so we just had to soldier on and tough up, and we were kids that would go on, but by the end of it, he had lost all his taste for dealing with children.
Okay, so it sounds like he did have a conscience, but it just took a while for that to kick in. Well, this takes me to one of the pioneers of remote viewing, Russell Targ out of SRI. What role did he play in the developing these remote viewing protocols at Inyokern?
So the Stanford Research Institute is all through all the documents that I found on Grill Flame. I haven't found any mention of Inyokern in any of the documents, and that makes sense because it was a highly classified project, obviously. But Stanford Research Institute personally dealt with Bob Monroe. The CIA had a file unbeknownst to Bob Monroe in 1972, I believe. They had already a file on him and the HemiSync technology that he was developing. Before it wasn't HemiSync at that point, it was a different technology. But the CIA already had a documentation on him, and in 1977 he was brought into the fold with the research that Hal Pudolph and Russell Targ had been doing. And I'm citing documents that I've downloaded from the Freedom of Information Act about that. So it was absolutely spawned off what they had discovered with Stanford Research Institute. It was absolutely was. So they really, they might not have invented outright remote viewing. And also there's documentation of remote viewing back as 1500 or 500 BC or something, that it's in this book. But they did pioneer psychoenergetics, so interacting with the target. Uri Geller is famed for changing magnetic fields at the isotope, whatever, I forget what the machine is called. It's at SRI in Menlo Park. There's a machine there, and so they were perturbing targets, not just viewing them. And so that is the birth of psychoenergetics, what they have. And because I was looking for information to support my time and space, fortunately, because I was taken on spur of the moment, I wasn't groomed for what I did. I was taken and they put me where I was needed, and then when that was over, they put me somewhere else, and then I went into the space program. Because of my research, just for proof, it led me really down the rabbit hole of the remote viewing history and everything, and it turns out that I was a participant in something that is hidden from history, a very integral part of remote viewing that has been hidden from history because it's classified. So I don't want to say I'm proud of it, but I feel that people need to know.
Oh yes, definitely they need to know, and I think they need to know who were the people behind this that were part of it. And like the scenario that comes to mind is that someone at the Stanford Research Institute is told that, oh, there's going to be an opportunity to work with cloned children, and you can do with them whatever you will, whatever you want, at a remote facility where there's going to be no laws, no ramifications for you. So, and this can take place over a course of whatever, a year or whatever. And some of the primary researchers, and Russell Targ's name comes up, said, yeah, I'll do that.
That is a possibility.
Okay, all right.
It definitely was a program. Like I said, it fell between so Grill Flame and the participants of Grill Flame were considered, the verbiage they used was a transfer of technology. So I have the document specifically in 2 separate occasions where they said Grill Flame assets are a transfer of technology, and therefore Army regulations do not apply. So the regulations where you treat somebody with human, as a U.S. citizen or an Army citizen, I think there's a difference, did not apply. So, and that went right up until January of 1983, where they reclassified it into center lane, and they said now all the participants must be volunteer only. So it was the last bit. It was the last bit of legality where they could do these maximum experiments. So they had a contractor come in and pay for it. They did it on a shoestring budget, and they threw the works at what they had. And so they were using electromagnetic fields, they were using drugs, they were using laser therapy, they were using binaurals, they were using, subliminal programming, hypnosis. They were using all the things that they could bear to make us to see what was the maximum amount of ESP or remote viewing that they could do. And then with the data, carried that into the other military programs that we see a lot of people public today that are very talented.
Now, you already mentioned that you did a kind of field trip to Enyukern with the Journey to the Truth guys, or one of the guys, and that what you saw confirmed your memories.
Absolutely.
So, what was the kind of emotional impact of that?
Oh, I was in shock. I did not expect. So I figured I'd go there and possibly ring a bell, and I figured I would go there and with Tyler film just a few instances that would really validate my experience. Like, where I could say, up here on the left, I remember that there was an airplane on a pedestal, and you go up and then there's the gates. And we would drive around and he would be a witness and film that, and we were going to make it for a documentary. I did not anticipate whatsoever to walk into the building that I once was, like, it was still there, it was intact, and the door was wide open. So it's a derelict building. The portable that we slept in was still there. And so after my abduction and the ETs operated on me and I woke up with no memory, that exact spot that I woke up in, last year I stood there. I walked in and I stood in that exact spot. And it jogged memories. Like if you went to a place that your family vacationed on a childhood, and you don't remember the vacation, but you return and go, now I remember this place. Those new memories would surface, and that was the exact phenomena that happened. When I went there and stood in that place, I was in complete shock. And it's been 9 years now that I've been doing this, finding, validating information, and albeit not often, but every single time, part of me is hoping that it's not true. Part of me is hoping that I could say that all those horrible memories of the things that happened to me are just, a bad dream. But this was possibly the strongest, most personally validating trip that I had done, was back to Enyukern. Like, even the time of day when the jets fly over. So it's the same as it was 40 years ago. So the same time in the morning, the fighter jets take off and go do exercises. The sun was the same, the mountains were the same, the humidity, the smells, all of it was exactly the same. The building was there. The second building chassis is there, destroyed, burnt. And the nurses station buildings are there with the large air conditioner, which I didn't remember until I saw them. And I went, oh God, that's it. And so And the places were there, the ditches were there, the exit was there. We went off into the hills. It was exactly as I remembered it, and the memories came fresh. So it really gave me the ability to research in a better way than I had done before. So, but I was in shock for days. Even we drove back. I got a plane out of Vegas. We drove to Vegas, and so I mean, just to finish up, I was in a state of shock for 2 or 3 days after the visit there. I was completely unprepared for the, I guess, the amount of things that I'd find that I remembered exactly. So I walked around in shock, and when I got home from that trip, I was, what's the word? Incredibly motivated to find more, to find more data, because the other thing is, in 82 and 83, I also have my parents and my brothers and sisters as witnesses that I never left home. So I was in Michigan as well. So during that time, so how could I know my way around the Kern Airport? It's not something you see in, it's not something you see in movies or in game shows, right? So it's a very obscure place, and I knew the layout there. I knew the buildings. And I've described them even beginning with you in 2016. So I've been describing them the entire time, the Kern place. But like I said, a lot of interviews want to talk about Mars and ETs.
Right. So this time we're diving deep into this whole Kern, because I think it's directly relevant to your book. And for those that don't know, in 2016 we did an interview together, a 4-part series at Mount Shasta, and that's available on my website. You can just go to exopolitics.org to watch that. So in terms of your testimony, your field trip at Kern, and you presented your data, the emotions you felt, that was all up there, and it was being shown for the first time at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection event in Orlando in 2023, and everyone was affected, but in particular there was Melanie Charest. She saw that, and she kind of like just broke down into tears, because it helped her, actually corroborated things that she says that she was remembering at that time. And I guess at that period she was trying to, is this real or not? So can you elaborate on what you know of Melanie's reaction to what you showed?
So my Kern trip was 2 weeks before that conference. So I was still reading cheat notes on stage because I was still unpacking the data. I had not gone through all the data that I dug up. It was 2 weeks fresh. And I did not expect the front row to start crying. So many people broke into tears when I showed the video of going in the building. Melanie specifically afterwards, I walked up after I got off stage and gave her a hug, and Jean-Charles told me, she said it's exactly like the place that she remembered, even though not in that location, but basically the same thing, because I put an artist rendition of how the beds looked and the layout, basically a military portable, and that she had gone through pretty much the same thing in her childhood. And Melanie and I are only 3 days apart in age. So we're the same age, so she would have, I don't know her account word for word, but we're very similar in age, and we went through, it seems like we both went through similar things, albeit hers a different military.
Right, and it must be something that helps those of you that are getting these memories, especially given that it happened in childhood. There was all these traumatic events, and it might be hard to believe that really happened, but then when you hear someone like yourself talking about and showing pictures of like, this is where it happened, this is the hut, this is the room, this is where the beds were lined up, this is where they did this kind of drug treatment and triage and all of that, that must make the world of difference for people wanting to remember what happened to them. And we're not talking isolated events here. Melanie, she believes that millions of children went through this. To me, that's astounding. Could millions of children have gone through something similar to what you had gone through?
So when you talk about programming somebody mentally, the children are much more efficient at that. You know, I always try to get in the head of who could do this. How could they have done this to me? And I try to get in the head of these people, and not a Stockholm syndrome thing, but just trying to assign logic to this, because it's emotionally so devastating to think about, to entertain. To even entertain the thought of it is emotionally devastating for most people. And so to look at it from why would they do this? From a military standpoint, it's about survival or national defense. So they're willing to do things that most people are not. And when you look into the mindset of them and under that lens, the children make more sense. So children are just faster learners. So they have different, there's nothing to unlearn. So when you're teaching psychic ability, the number one thing is to believe that you can do it. Well, children don't know any better. So children don't have anything. We have to unlearn. If we were going to take you as a grown man and put you through the same exact thing, you already have a basis. You already know what the world is like. You know how to drive. You could escape. You would be far more harder to train than a child that has basically a blank mind. And so, there's a certain amount of logic there. Sadly, they've ran away with the technology, so they think that they have a free pass, that you're not going to, because that's what I was told when I would ask them directly during my 20 and back years, how could you do this to me? They said, you're not going to remember it anyway. So they've given themselves a morality that is false, of that they can do this to children because they're not going to remember it when they put them back. And so I guess that's the biggest thing that I'm proud of, is that I'm one of the people that proves that wrong. I do remember it. Mm-hmm. And they know I remember it.
Now, you have found some documentary evidence supporting your memories, and one of the things you did show me, and it's in your new book, is that this program that you were involved in, their use of drugs, their use of deprivation, other forms of abusive behaviours or treatments, was designed to enhance psychic abilities. And you found a document, a 1983 document, I believe, that prescribed that. So, the question is, why would you prescribe something unless you were using it at some point? So you
can I read it?
Please, yes.
So, what I found was that...
This is Tony's new book. You want to just show the cover?
Show the book, yeah. It's Beyond Sight, The Hidden History of Remote Viewing and Psychoenergetics.
And what page are you going to?
I believe it's 138.
So, page 138 of Beyond Sight. This is what...
So just cue this up. So they had broke into two versions of research, and when I believe his name was John Kramer, developed the AMSAA, so Applied Remote Viewing Protocol, that the Army was going to use, and what went on to be a standard. They prescribed that during the research, his methods would have no drugs, hypnosis, special sensory, visual, auditory, or olfactory, or proprioceptive stimuli, liminal or subliminal, electrical or electromagnetic stimulus will be used in this protocol. So they dictated that none of those methods will be used, because they were for soldiers in the field or for people that were in agencies, so people that were official employees of the apparatus. So that means that they were using those on us. So the other version, which was unrestricted because it was classified in a black program, we're all testing those technologies to see if they could make better remote viewers or better psychoenergetic agents, I guess. So, and in fact, I did become field operational in '83 and went to Peru for 2 years. And, that's in my first story. But I was field operational. I was a 10 and 11-year-old boy working as a psychic in a as a field operational psychic, so in South America.
Well, that's very important, this time in Peru, and you're field operational. You've been enhanced through these protocols that were later on deemed illegal, but at the time there was, as you said, that window of opportunity for the remote viewing trainers to do this stuff. So you're trained, you go to Peru. So can you describe how you were field operational? What kind of remote viewing or psychoenergetics were you doing in Peru? So
it had to be under a subcontractor, not the official narrative, because we were shipping, in fact, unrefined cocaine from Peru, from Puerto Tawantinsuyo, Peru, which is now called Boca, Colorado, Peru. They've changed the name of the town. It's a separate story. And we were flying shipments of cocaine paste, unrefined cocaine, to Santa Marta, Colombia, once a month. And while we were in the air, they would wrap me in a EMF blanket and give me an IV. And after we got into the air, about 3 or 4 hours over the state of Acre, heading north, I would be drugged and I'd be near death. I would have a near-death experience. And while I was under, they could ask me questions and get accurate answers, and it was reliable. So I had a handler, someone that spoke English, because everybody in that village spoke Spanish. And by the end of the time, I was there for two rainy seasons. And by the end of the time, he had a clipboard with questions from people in the town to ask me questions while I was under. And he said that other people, there were times when I spoke Spanish. I had accurate forecasts of the weather, if the police were there at the airport, if it was safe to land. It's easy to see how that would be useful in a military setting, or for a contractor, for a corporation that was smuggling drugs or doing other illegal activity. It would easy to see how that would be very valuable.
Now we need to back up a little bit there, because you said that they induced a near-death experience so that you could be active. So that suggests that during your time at Ingukern, some of that trauma-based mind control involved taking you and the other kids.
I do describe that.
I
do describe that in this book as well, that they used oxygen. So we had oxygen tents, and they would lower the oxygen, and we were hooked up to heart monitor or some form of monitor. And when we were near death, the oxygen would come back on, and we would wake up. And then it would repeat. Then slowly the oxygen, another gas would come in the tent, an inert gas, and we would be suffocated. And you'd go closer to death. And the experience, which was horrible, was that each time I got closer and closer to being dead, to leaving my body and being dead. And it actually was pleasurable. When I was suffocating, it was very I don't want to say painful, but it was very unpleasant. And then I would leave my body and the bell would go off. Bing, you'd hear the bell, and then oxygen would come in, and I would return to my body. And after a while, I got angry, and I spoke as an adult, let this kid die. And I was 10. And the lights flickered, the lights there was an electrical event that happened when I did that, when I got angry, and the nurse said, "Doctor, we've got one here." And that qualified me for that technology, and that was the end of it. I mean, that was the end of that exercise. But they were using oxygen deprivation. Something that was disturbing was that a few years after I went public, and I've said this story already to other people, and on interviews I've described that process as early as 2016 and 2017, was that the movie Deadpool portrayed it. It was the exact same process. When I saw that, I couldn't believe my eyes that Hollywood was depicting an actual technology.
So the fact that when you were in Peru and they took you up into the plains, and a couple of hours in, they inject this drug, and you're brought to a near-death state, and you then began to do the remote viewing, the psychoenergetics. That they were doing that means that this protocol that was developed at Ingukern must have been highly successful.
It was highly successful. I had a private investigator at one point looking into my testimony and researching the Stanford Research Institute. And there was a video that I've since been able to uncover. So I had the video, and I can't find it anymore. But basically, they were having a party, and they were all cheers, and it was 1981, and they said, "We're very excited because we've had tremendous promising results with children in near-death experience." And so they were celebrating that because this gave them the ability to contract and extend the program for the funding. So they were celebrating the fact, and their exact words were children with near-death experience. So they were drugging us, and that's exactly what I remember. So it all dubbed, and like I said, I went on record with you in 2015 privately describing it to you. So all these things have happened after the fact that have been discovered.
Okay. So in Peru, you're taken to the point of death after they inject this substance. So what were you able to do in terms of fulfilling these drug missions for the cartels over there?
So I was told that we went off course. So I was unconscious. And after 4 or 5 times, I began to remember what it was like to be in between being dead. And that's the substance of my second book, Project Star Maker. So I was able to access, distant memories and experiences, but it was like being dead or being out of body, without a body, in a darkness, in a dark place, in between being dead and alive. And it seems like other consciousness, other people could speak through me. Other dead people could speak through me, and they could ask them questions, and they had reliable information. So the weather was bad. The plane went off course one time, and I told him the correct direction to go and the correct altitude over the mountains, and it got us there. There were times when there were police patrols on the runway, and I alerted them. We'd circle around and then land. So they were using it for a form of foretelling. And then the person that took care of me, he said he spoke to his dead grandmother, and that I spoke fluent Spanish, which I still, even though I'm trying to learn it, I still can't speak Spanish. But there were times when he said I spoke fluent Spanish, and that people that had passed in that village were speaking through me and leaving messages for their loved ones. So in that state of mind, it's almost like, and we've heard about, there are other hospital testimonies that say, other walk-in testimonies, and it seemed to support that.
Mm-hmm. So this is amazing. So we're talking 1983 now. You're field operational from
Yep.
83 to 84. You're actually practicing different forms of psychoenergetics, including remote viewing. You're very successful, and I guess at some point, that came to an end, and we don't need to go into that, but maybe just describe
What happened?
What brought it to an end?
Sugar. So I believe that it was a ketamine version. It was a ketamine anesthetic that they were using, that they had discovered. So there are documents that show that field operational surgeries in Vietnam they were using a ketamine anesthetic on soldiers, and then while they were under, they were giving accurate descriptions of the battle the next day. They were giving prophetic prophecies of what was going to happen, and then it got classified. But there's documents that tell of that. So the other thing about ketamine that I looked into and researched, because that's what I remember, is that I wasn't allowed to have sugar. And at the end, I was given, there was a woman in the village that would come by and give me cupcakes that had sugar in them, and then I'd go up in the plane and I was very sick afterwards, and I lost the ability. And what I've researched, that the ketamine anesthetic creates if you have sugar and they give you a ketamine anesthetic, you have a hyperglucose event and brain swelling. And so there's evidence to support that as well. And absolutely, she was bringing, like, they were like little cornbread. It was like a cornbread muffin, because I was cut off from her. They didn't want her around me anymore. And she was my handler's mother, and she really took care of me and looked out for me. She loved my eyes, she said. It reminded her of her first husband. And but she would come by and give me these little muffins, and they were very sweet. And then I remember being sick afterwards. And we'd go on the mission. I was sick for weeks, almost until the next mission. And they were monthly flights. And so that was when I got canceled and then shipped off back to Seattle, okay, where I was privately owned.
Okay. So we're going to kind of like shift now to your kind of more recent efforts to create remote viewing protocols and train others in remote viewing. But to kind of like summarize what's just happened, it's just like you, back in 1982, for several years, you were exposed to illegal remote viewing protocol training. You became highly proficient at it. You were field operational, and it was only because of some accidental kind of eating of sugar that particular phase came to an end, and then you were shuffled off to something else, and that was the rest of the 20-year and back. And we've covered that.
That's in my first book, yeah.
Exactly. Go to the first book, Sarah's Colony Cavalier, yep, to read about what happened after Tony's experiences improved. So now we come to recently. You decide, okay, what made you decide that you're going to start training others in remote viewing?
Well, there was a progression. So getting my memories back and then researching what happened to me made me research kind of a manifestation method. And I used that in my personal life when I had an emergency situation. And I started a Patreon group, with Jackie Kenner, my original editor and co-author for Star Maker. And she wanted to branch off and have groups in Patreon to kind of monetize it a little more, make more money with it. So we started a tier 3, which was a psychoenergetics exercise where we're meditating with some peripherals, with an intention, simultaneously. Everybody does it at the same exact time. We've had tremendous results. And as a practice for that, we thought, well, let's just to practice meditating, because you go into the blank mind meditation. So let's just try a remote view for fun. And I was hiding things in a bucket in my garage. And then the group would meditate and take a guess. We weren't using a protocol at all. And it got good. It turned into a bunch of fun. And then I uncovered documents on the CRV and the memories. Oh God, that's what I remember. And so I started a remote viewing group, which is we learn it, and we don't learn. We're not locked into one method. We use every method that we can do, different methods of meditation, to see what works for people individually. And it's not for the purpose of discovering the target. So other remote viewing groups that are out there, which are awesome, Farsight and all these other groups that are doing tremendous work, they're looking for aggressive targets, like who killed Kennedy, or where are the ETs located? These kind of targets to prove to answer questions. We're not doing that. We're doing remote viewing so that you can get in touch with the correct voice that is speaking to you when you're remote viewing. And you have validation when you open the target and you got the target. You know that your intuition that told you that is the correct voice. And it's a life skill. And it's fun. We have a blast. We meet weekly, and we open the target and everybody goes, oh, that is what I saw. So your self-doubt kicks in, and there are many different shades to the experience, and everybody enjoys it. It's a lot of fun. So we do it in that regard. It's about personal development, not about answering the questions of the target, is what I'm doing. And I also think that keeps me under the radar of some of the bad guys too. So.
Right. Now, in your book, you talk about the historical aspect of remote viewing, that in times long ago, thousands of years ago, it was known as something else. And I think of the Oracle of Delphi.
That's right.
Was the Oracle of Delphi just another way of doing remote viewing?
In fact, that's the first recorded, that's in here in the beginning of the book. It's the first recorded instance of remote viewing. There was a king, I forget the name right now, but all these oracles were wanting to be his personal psychic, and he gave them a challenge. And it was the Oracle of Delphi that remote viewed. What he said, tell me say what I'm going to be doing at sunset on the 3rd day, or whatever, on the 9th day of the month at sunset. Describe what's going on. And the Oracle of Delphi described it perfectly. And he was blown away and inscripted that. They were using it for warfare. There's mention of it, slight mention, the Egyptians were using prophetic, what do they call them? I forget, prophets or priests. Oracles for warfare, to spy on other armies, to track troop movements of ancient armies. And I started out, I was just going to do, this book was originally, my intention was just to do the history of psiability of human, because the other thing is most people are very unaware. They think you have to be special to do it, and the reality is we're all special enough to do it. Everybody has psiability, and there's a real effort to hide it from you, or make you laugh at it or deny it. And my research just led me to proving my account of the time in the secret space program, and in doing so I found all this information. And it's fun, and I think it's very important for people to know that it's been all along. All through recorded history, we've been doing remote viewing. We've been doing ESP, if you want to call it that, and psychoenergetics. And our militaries really ran with it in the 70s, and they poured money into it, and they had access to medical research that let them really be proficient at it.
I did an interview with Miriam Delicado a couple of months ago, and she said something that was interesting, and that relates to the whole the US military intelligence community playing catch up to the Russians. She said that she was told by her father that during the Second World War that the Russians or the Soviets had a psychic espionage program, or that they had psychic recruits, and that Miriam says that what she was asked when she was approached, I think it was in 1981 or 91, she said that she was asked whether she would want to, and she's Canadian, she was asked if she was willing to join a Russian psychic program where there were 10,000 psychics, and they had all the resources you wanted, and you would be protected and looked after all your life. And she said that her father had warned her, if the Russians ever approach you to use your psychic abilities, say no. And that was during the Second World War. So that tells me that since the Second World War, that the Soviets and now Russia have had a highly developed psychic program, and that the Americans in the 1970s realized that, oh, fuck, this is real. What are we going to do?
Well, I can tell you that just from my own experience, even with novice remote viewers that are just learned it in a short period of time and devote a small period of time a week to it, when you have a number of them and you can look for overlaps in their data, it's extremely powerful. So even novice remote viewers can come up with very solid, very concrete data. It's extremely powerful. When you have a dozen of them and they all say the same thing for a target that's far away, and even novice ones that only put 5 minutes into the session, they come up with some good data. So to think of 10,000 psychics and what that could do in a military, organized in a military way is scary.
Right, so any final words you want to say about the projects you're working on today that you want to let people know about?
I'm working on a lot of stuff. There's a couple that I don't want to talk about that I've begun mentioning in the book. The psychoenergetic monuments that I found all throughout history and the evidence around that, and I'm going to try to recreate some of that. There are a few other projects that I'm working on to try to recreate some of the technologies that I worked with, albeit in a more humane way, with adults, consenting adults, and just try to push it and put it out there, because I'm in the unique perspective of they did me against my will, so I didn't sign a I didn't sign a contract saying that I have to be quiet about it. I can speak about this, and they can't legally come and off me, So if this ultimately, as far as they're concerned, they have to admit the entire project if they want to persecute me for just declassifying these technologies, or they have to let it slide as if it's a coincidence. But I'm in a unique perspective. I'm in a unique situation, and so since my trip to Inyokern, that's really been the bulk of my effort for the last year, is to try to recreate these technologies and then let everybody know, declassify them. And I'm moving into, I'd like to do live courses where I'm doing remote viewing sessions, like little camps that people come to. And I'm going to make a few more products, recorded products, and then expand the groups. They're growing quickly, and it really is expanding quickly. And because it's a lot of fun, it's very gratifying. But that's in the near term. I'm going to do that. I'm working on 2 more books with the data that I've gotten from people that have come to me saying they lived through the same thing. So I'm not alone in this. The 20 and back thing, it's a few thousand people have contacted me, and when I really analyze what they've gone through and look for common denominators, many of them are credible. So it's a widespread phenomenon, and there's just a lot to it. And since I've gone public, I thought I was just going to be in and out of this community, but there's a lot of work to do. So
I know you're going to be presenting, as will I, at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection on September 27 to 29, Westminster, Colorado. So what are you going to be presenting on?
So this conference here in France, which has been amazing and a wonderful blessing of an experience. Chris Hassan, who put it on, wanted me to replay kind of last year's information, so I'm not unpacking all of the book stuff. So I'm going to go into the technologies in Denver at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection. I'm going to go through kind of in detail the information in my new book, Beyond Sight. So I'm going to present it all in a way that makes sense, so that somebody that's never heard of it before hopefully can understand what I'm talking about. That's the goal.
And what website do people go to find out more about your recent book and your past books? TonyRodrigues.com. So just how it's spelled, TonyRodrigues.com. And there's links to the books there. I put out Series Colony Cavalier on Kindle in French, in a French version, and we're working on a Spanish version for that. And then Project Star Maker will be next after that, the other languages, because clearly at this conference it shows that there's a real thirst for the information. This book is there. Hope to put out maybe one a year, maybe sooner. And you can reach me there. You can contact me there. It links to my Patreon and to all the classes.
to our interviews are posted there, so anybody wants to see the original Exopolitics one is down at the bottom. And I'm trying to think of anything else. Memory courses in case you suspect you were involved, and just ways to follow up on all this. So,
okay, so Beyond Sight, the hidden history of remote viewing and psychoenergetics, that's Tony Rodrigues' latest book, and you can go to his website to order that, or Amazon. And so I want to thank you, Tony, for being on the show.
thanks for having me. It's so good to see you again.
You have been listening to Exopolitics today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.